I'll take a little bit of time to explain how the whole data for the app is done. So just wanted to start off by going through the screens on this simulator, and then I'll show how the data of everything that you see here on the mobile app is reflected on a web-based app for an administrator to manage. So the core part of the app is essentially all of these different stories, and they're essentially swiped from the left to the right. And you can see that there's an image, there's some data, it can be expanded, and then there's a like and unlike button, and there's this certain thing which shows number one of chapter one, which is what we call sequence. From a navigation standpoint, there is a menu on the top right, dashboard, groups, primarily what we use. Story isn't really anything except for it's pretty much this page. So everything that you see here on this page is essentially what we call stories or challenges. And recently I've just set up one challenge, which is at the back. The challenges will show up at the back like this in purple. Purple color means it's a challenge. Anything in blue is a story. And these two are the primarily key types of kind of activities that people can do. And you realize that even for the stories, some of them have this sequence and some of them do not, like this. So the difference is, if it's in a sequence, then most likely there's a number 2, there's a number 3, and as a user progresses through the story, it changes and it updates itself to the next number of the sequence. So number 1 of chapter 3 will become number 2 of chapter 3 when the task is completed for this first chapter, as opposed to a story that doesn't have a sequence. Then it will just do and finishes. So a story in this case could be, for example, a one-off event or one-off activity that somebody, a company or the school might want to introduce, as opposed to a sequence activity whereby a company or a school might want to kind of go through a few months worth of content. So this part is what we call stories, and as I was kind of explaining here, you can see that there's a story tab here. Everything that you see in that screen just now is actually reflected on this table. It's called the story table, and you can see here that all of the description is here, and there's this skill, there's a name, there's a category, achievements, image, videos, and all of this can be edited directly from this table itself. So I can just come here and change the wording here, expand it, make it smaller, save it. Some of the key most important things to be aware of is on the right side, is that, one second, is that we can actually scroll to the right, and there are a couple of pretty interesting attributes like expiry, bonus sparks, reduce, refresh. All of this information all of this information are being used for the task that's hooked up to the story, which I will explain in a little bit more at the later parts of the introduction or the explanations of the different features. So images are uploaded here, videos can also be uploaded. At this point of time, our core focus is on the image, and you will also realize that the stories might actually be hooked up to this thing called the task group, which is what I was explaining just now, that is actually the sequence. So you can see that there's chapter 1 and number 1, which then shows up here just now. Chapter 1 of number 1 is this, chapter 1 of number 1, over here, chapter 1 number 1. How it hooks up is that you can see that this chapter 1 number 1 is actually a story. I could actually make it a challenge. This is an error, this is challenge. And if I make it as a story, then this has a list of stories for me to choose from. So if I change this story, then it will pick up a different story to be shown on the app. So what it means is that a story can be either part of a task group or not part of a task group, which is what I meant just now. It can be either in a task group, which is in this case having a sequence, or it can potentially not be in a task group, where it's just a standalone event, standalone story like this. So what will happen is this listening can be a superpower, get to work, test 412, is not in any task group. You see, there's no funky story here that's tied to it. So it's a completely standalone, separate story that doesn't therefore show up on that doesn't have a sequence in it. So this is pretty much the explanation for the stories. And again, all of each of the story has certain information that will be used in later activities like the task groups, as well as tasks that will use attributes like the number of tokens, the refresh, the expiries, and the bonus sparks. So this is something that I'll explain in the next video.